Magħna għal di l-konferenza, naħseb li huwa pass importanti fis-settur kemm tal-LGBTIQ+ u anke fis-settur tad-diżabilità. Fejn qegħdin nitkellmu fuq Intersecting Identities fejn qed niffukaw speċifikament fuq identitajiet fejn jidħol il-sexual orientation u l-gender identity u anke d-diżabilità. Jiena looking forward għal konferenza, looking forward għaliex ħajkonna l-prezentazzjoni ta' Matthew fejn ħajkun qed jitkellem dwar ir-riċerka li għamilna, looking forward għaliex kun hawn diskussjoni bejn stakeholders differenti fis-setturi differenti biex naraw kif nistgħu nkomplu nsaħħu l-inklużjoni kemm fil-komunità LGBTIQ+ għal persuni b'diżabilità imma anke biex inkomplu nwessaw il-perċezzjonijiet tagħna fejn tidħol is-sesswalità, is-sexual orientation u anke l-identità tal-ġeneru għal persuni b'diżabilità kemm jidħol is-servizzi fejn jidħol il-mod ta' kif inġibu ruħna u naġixxu mal-persuni b'diżabilità. U hopefully minn hawnhekk nitilqu b'idea ġodda biex mhux nistennew pride oħra, imma matul din is-sena nkunu qegħdin naħdmu flimkien biex inkomplu insaħħu s-servizzi għal persuni b'diżabilità li huma wkoll parti minn din il-komunità. Nixtieq li sena oħra jerġa' jkollna din l-opportunità, imma minflok inkunu qed ngħidu x'inhi s-sitwazzjoni preżenti u forsi nitkellmu fuq l-isfidi li għandna jkun qed jgħidilna dwarhom anke Matthew mir-riċerka, nkunu qed nitkellmu fuq x'implementajna minn din ir-riċerka, x'kienu l-findings, x'kienu r-recommendations u fejn qegħdin x'passi għamilna l-qudiem biex ikollna verament iktar inklużjoni ta' dawn il-persuni li jiffurmaw parti minn żewġ minoritajiet soċjali. Ħanħalli fidejk Andrew, ħalli tgħidilna żewġ kelmiet. Nispera li tieħdu pjaċir b'did-diskussjoni u li kollha kemm aħna nitilqu minn hawnhekk b'xi ħaġa ġdida, nkunu tallimna xi ħaġa ġdida.
L-odwa tajba, kif qalet Samantha, dawn huma okkażjonijiet importanti ħafna. Imma okkażjonijiet importanti ħafna fuq diversi livelli. L-ewwel ħaġa jekk nieħduhom bħala a pat on the back u ngħidu hija minna dil-biċċa xogħol u bravi mexxejna, naħseb inkunu ċekkinna ħafna dil-opportunità. Il-fatt li qegħdin hawnhekk jiena nara bħala attività politika importanti, mhux biss għax għandna l-politiċi u rrid ngħid ukoll il-ministri ma setgħux ikunu magħna fil-bidu minħabba l-kabinet imma sta ġejjin iktar tard, ġifieri żgur se jkunu iktar tard magħna, però mhux hija attività politika, hija attività fejn aħna qed ngħidu isma' x'qed jiġri u x'nistgħu nirranġaw fiha. U allura jiena dejjem inqabbel u ngħid isma' x'qed jingħad fil-pjazza, x'qed jingħad għand il-barbier. Tajjeb jiena kemm il-darba semmejta di l-għaxqa tiegħi immur għand il-barbier u l-uniku post illi nkun nixtieq inkun fil-kju u ma jaġlux. Għaliex għax hemmhekk tisma' in-nies x'qed jgħidu, in-nies fit-triq x'qed jgħidu, in-nies x'jaħsbu, in-nies kif qed jgħixu l-esperjenzi tagħhom fil-ħajja, mhux b'mod sofistikat, mhux b'konverzazzjoni, mhux b'lingwa, mhux bi kliem sofistikat, imma bi kliem ġenwin ħafna. U allura meta nkun mixi fil-pjazza mal-kelb, jew nkella meta nkun għand il-barbier ma' Patrizio, jew nkella ma' George, jiena nieħu gost għaliex inkun qed nisma' verament x'qed jgħidu nies. U allura li kieku kellna insaqsu lil Patrizio u nsaqsu lil George il-ballun, qed ngħid hekk għax hu jieħu gost billi għandu dak il-għam, jew insaqsu in-nies l-anzjani illi jkunu fil-pjazza ta' żebbuġ, x'jaħsbu fuq dan is-suġġett? X'jgħidulna? Ma fimna bladi xejn? Fuq xi qed taħlu l-ħin? Jgħidulna iva għandkom raġun, x'qed jgħidu? U naħseb hemmhekk importanti li nżommu dan f'moħħna għax inkella nitlu fil-bubble tagħna, inħossuna tajjeb għax qed nagħmlu l-affarijiet tajbin u nserta sewwa illi Matthew huwa wieħed mill-aħjar riċerkaturi li għandna. Inħarsu lejn il-Kummissjoni li qed tagħmel xogħol tajjeb, ngħidu l-fakultà qed tagħmel xogħol tajjeb, ħafna patting on the back, u fil-verità nkunu ġo ċirku għalina, ġo babel għalina, bħal dawk il-bżiża, bħal dawk il-balloons, laqqas noħlhom nitla' fihom, narhom l-iktar fl-Amerika li jittilgħu fl-oli u ngħidu għax aħna, u nkun qed titkellem maż-żewġ min-nies li għandek fil-kaxxa miegħek. U allura din naħseb importanti ħafna. U importanti għaliex naħseb illi anke dak li we have achieved, jew aħjar you have achieved, il-komunitajiet differenti, kemm il-komunità LGBT+, kemm il-komunità tal-persuni b'diżabilità fuq livell leġislattiv, fuq livell ta' proċeduri, fuq livell ta' strutturi, u dan kollu importanti nkomplu nitkellmu fuqhom. Għaliex jekk ma nkomplux nitkellmu fuqhom, hemm riskju li hu naħsbu li għax qegħdin hemmhekk kuntenti. U allura saret il-biċċa tax-xogħol u issa m'għandkomx il-liġi fit-2000 il-qasam ta' diżabilità kellu liġi Legal Opportunities Act illi kienet groundbreaking. Mhux Malta ta' groundbreaking għall-Ewropa, kienet liġi aħjar minn tal-Awstralja, liġi aħjar minn tal-New Zealand. Għamlet id-differenza x'jiena kieku jien nuża l-wheelchair u rrid immur l-HS biss inġbed il-flus ma nistax. Kieku jien irrid immur il-Gazin, it-12th May, jew St. Philip's, nieħu pizza, jew għand il-cake box nipprova nsemmihom kemm ma possibbli. Jien ma rnexxilix. Għax jew insib Pilandra, jew insib toqba, jew insib rampa, jew insib bank. Mela jien nibda ngħid dik kienet biżejjed le. U naħseb ir-raġuni għaliex ma żammejniex il-konverzazzjoni għadija biżejjed il-ħin kollu, mod konstanti. U allura jien nixtieq illi dal-forum ikun loop żgħira, ħolqa żgħira f'dil-konverzazzjoni li għandna bżonn nagħmlu. U dil-konverzazzjoni titfa' responsabilità fuq il-kummissjonijiet u fuq l-entitajiet, imma anke titfa' responsabilità fuq l-università biex tagħmel ir-riċerka empirika biex tagħti d-data ħalli nkunu nistgħu nagħmlu il-mistoqsijiet u nippruvaw insibu it-tweġibiet għalihom. U allura jiena nirringrazzja lil kull min qed jipparteċipa, nirringrazzja lil min kien involut fir-riċerka, nirringrazzja wkoll lil min qed isegwina minn diversi postijiet. Profost kollox jiena qed ngħid u qed niddikjara li aħna assolutament ma wasalniex. U jkun żball hekk inħallu il-minja li jenana illi aħna wasalna. It-triq għada twila ħafna. Li hu tajjeb illi din hija biċċa oħra fejn aħna we're walking the talk, qed nimxu pass ieħor. Grazie.
Mela, ħanaddu mill-ewwel fidejk Matthew ħalli tispjegalna ftit x'kienu il-research questions ta' riċerka, x'kienu l-findings illi sibna u xi recommendations qegħdin isiru biex inkomplu nimxu l-qudiem ħalli mbagħad anke jkollna diskussjoni miftuħa hawnhekk ma' l-stakeholders illi hawn preżenti.
Thank you, Samantha. I will be presenting the findings from the research titled Intersecting Identities, Disability and Sexuality. First, a brief background. Intersectionality is a framework that provides the insight to understand how the various aspects of a person's identity and the change in legislation might not automatically change attitudes. In fact, society continues to make sexual orientation and gender identity minority individuals feel like outsiders through its prevalent heteronormativity, which assumes that all individuals are either male or female according to the gender assigned at birth and heterosexual. The situation is even worse for individuals who are also persons with disability, as they already face discrimination based on their disability. Now we will look at the aims of this research. The aims were threefold: to identify the impacts of gender identity and sexual orientation on the lives of persons with disability, to determine how the identified impacts can be overcome, and to propose future policy and practice recommendations that can help overcome these impacts. The methods of this research: a qualitative approach was adopted to gain a more in-depth insight of these experiences. To address these aims, data were obtained from persons with a disability who identify as LGBTQ+, service providers, and LGBTQ+ NGOs. Data was collected through semi-structured interviews and was analyzed through thematic analysis. The findings. 5 superordinate teams were drawn from these experiences, and the first team related to the experiences of coming out. This was described as a unique, lengthy, and turbulent lifelong process which required a great deal of courage and trust. In fact, most participants tried to find the best timing for their coming out, especially when coming out to their parents due to its importance. Sociopolitical milestones relating to LGBTIQ+ rights have also empowered LGBTIQ+ individuals to come out. Exploring one's sexual orientation and gender identity involves getting to know oneself really well. With time, LGBTIQ+ individuals might understand their sexual orientation or gender identity better, and thus they would require to come out again. Parental reactions to coming out depend on various underlying factors. Unsuspecting parents might react more negatively, especially those with a strong religious background. Another reason for parents reacting negatively is their deeply rooted heteronormative beliefs. Adverse reactions may also occur due to excessive paternalism and parents overprotecting their disabled child. Parents fail to understand that their adult child has any sexual needs, and the realization that not only does their child have sexual needs, but that they also identify as LGBTIQ+ can be a hard pill to swallow. Having a disability made coming out harder. Some found it harder to express what they were feeling, and persons with intellectual disabilities might not have the correct vocabulary to describe these feelings. This highlights the importance for persons with disability to have the personalized and adequate sex education programs. Furthermore, at times, coming out was not taken seriously and perceived as confusion caused by disability. The second theme dealt with attitudes. Attitudes towards both minority groups are still somewhat discriminatory, so living within this intersect is even more difficult. One of the main reasons for this is the lack of awareness that society has about disability and LGBTIQ+ issues. Discrimination was often expressed verbally and frequently predominated by ableism and stereotypical ideas about disability and LGBTIQ+ issues. The next theme was the impact on the lives of persons with disability who identify as LGBTIQ+. Impacts were seen in 6 main areas, which were socializing, employment, education, well-being, health, and hidden disabilities. The impact on education was predominant in the findings. One of the most common findings was the lack of understanding about disability and LGBTIQ+ issues by educators and academic institutions. Insensitive comments passed by teachers sometimes cause students to feel disheartened about continuing their education, with one participant expressing having to change between several schools. Participants had different experiences at their place of work. Colleagues often had their own beliefs, and these beliefs impacted the participants' experiences. Negative attitudes were also expressed by employers who showed a lack of sensitivity and at times refused to make minor changes to accommodate access arrangements for persons with disability. This in turn left one participant unable to retain full-time employment, which exacerbated financial barriers caused by having to move out of the family home due to the breakdown experienced in the child-parent relationship after coming out. This solidifies the added hardships experienced by persons living within more than one minority group. Being financially restricted may then have an impact on health. Seeking private medical services can be very costly, but it is sometimes inevitable due to the lack of support services for adult persons with certain types of impairments, further worsening their financial situation. The daily lives of participants were impacted in various ways. Simple things like going to a supermarket or shopping mall and getting the bus required a great deal of effort, and sometimes led to awkward situations. These came about from the lack of knowledge and awareness in society about the intersection between disability and LGBTIQ+ issues. This may lead affected individuals to avoid these situations by not going out. thus further increasing the possibility of social exclusion and loneliness. The lack of LGBTIQ+ venues and spaces in Malta was the most common barrier to socializing. Participants commented that most LGBTIQ+ events revolve around alcohol and clubbing. As a result of this, affected individuals might increasingly be socially excluded from the LGBTIQ+ community. Apart from the lack of accessibility to these venues and events, the LGBTIQ+ community itself has been said to be somewhat discriminatory. As part of the services offered by the State Disability Service, Agencia Support provides sex education to its clients. However, it only addresses basic concepts. Training about sexual orientation and gender identity minorities is also provided to staff to create a more inclusive environment. However, sometimes resistance is experienced. Nevertheless, the agency emphasizes the importance of inclusivity and takes the necessary actions so that all employees follow in the agency's vision. Despite not encountering many persons with disability so far, NGOs representing the LGBTIQ+ community are becoming more aware that persons with disability might identify as LGBTIQ+. NGOs have an essential role in increasing awareness about issues relating to disability, making their events more accessible, and increasing the visibility of persons with disability in the LGBTIQ+ community. We drew several recommendations from these findings. The recommendations were directed towards 6 main areas, which were disability services, education, support, socializing, visibility, and NGOs. Recommendations relating to disability services, including the strengthening of available disability services and individualized and ongoing positive sex education offered to all service users. Recommendations relating to education included mandatory courses for all employees working with persons with disability about sexuality, including sexual expression, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Courses for parents of persons with disability about sexuality, including sexual expression, sexual orientation, and gender identity. CPD courses for employees working in the education sector relating to disability and LGBTIQ+ issues. Training to employers and individuals working in managerial positions about disability and LGBTIQ+ issues, and education at community level. Also, it was suggested to offer free training relating to disability and LGBTIQ+ issues to all NGOs. Increase in awareness-raising effects also with regards to sex education, sexuality, and sexual orientation and sexual expression and identity at community level. Recommendations relating to support included making the LGBTIQ+ shelter accessible for persons with disability, prioritizing persons with multiple intersecting identities when accessing social housing and other services, promoting support to persons with disability who identify as LGBTIQ+, and promoting services to the parents or guardians of persons with disability who identify as LGBTIQ+. Recommendations relating to socializing included the introduction of a library cafe in the proposed LGBTIQ+ community center, increasing accessibility and promotion of events and spaces. There were also recommendations relating to accessibility in general, which included the enforcement of accessibility across the board, supporting NGOs in making their events more accessible, ensuring accessibility to health services, promoting free public services to ensure that persons with disability are aware and they are reached by these services. Recommendations, finally, relating to visibility, ensure the involvement of persons with disability who identify as LGBTIQ+ in the decision-making process, and involve persons with disability who identify as LGBTIQ+ in public awareness-raising events. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Naħseb nistgħu ngħidu li ħarġu elementi interessanti, elementi li huma magħrufa għal setturi differenti, imma meta issa qed inġibuhom flimkien naraw forsi aktar id-diffikultajiet li wieħed jesperjenza fir-realtà. Tkellimna dwar il-viżibilità u naħseb dik hija waħda mill-affarijiet li qegħdin nippruvaw nagħmlu hawnhekk hemm importanti li nagħtu l-vuċi lil persuni b'diżabilità sabiex inkomplu nsaħħu dawn ir-realtajiet imma rridu nitkellmu wkoll aktar anke aħna min-naħa tagħna apparti dax-xogħol li qed isir bħalissa fuq intersectionality speċifikament qed naħdmu anke fuq l-aspett ta' institutionalization u naħseb persuni b'diżabilità illi qegħdin fis-istituzzjonijiet huma fost l-iktar persuni li l-vuċi tagħhom ma tinstemax. U naħseb fejn jidħol dan l-aspett ta' sexuality u having a disability irridu naħdmu anke f'dan is-settur speċifikament. Ġifieri issa nħalli fidejk Claire ħalli nkomplu bid-diskussjoni.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to switch to English to be able to reach all our panel members. I'd like to start with our grassroots, people working in the grassroots, our NGOs, starting with MGRM. We have Robert representing MGRM. I'd like to ask you the first question, Robert. Can you tell us about the initiatives that MGRM has engaged in so far to support persons with disability who also identify as LGBT+, and what practices do you suggest that similar NGOs adopt so that they can become more inclusive?
As part of MGRM, we offer the Rainbow Support Service, which provides social work services for LGBTIQ+ individuals, families, and friends. And this includes a number of people with physical disabilities and invisible disabilities, and obviously mental health issues. The MGRM office is wheelchair accessible in order to accommodate people with mobility issues. And currently, as some of you may already know, we are working on the Awsalla, which will be a community center as well as assisted accommodation for LGBTIQ+ people. In the process, we have consulted with CRPD to ensure the place is accessible for everyone. Last year, together with CRPD, we have collaborated on an online campaign featuring 3 different people with 3 different disabilities, showcasing their experiences. This year, we have collaborated with CRPD again, but this time for a visual podcast that is going to be launched on the 8th, and you'll see a teaser of it soon, in a couple of hours or less, perhaps. It is especially important to bring the voices and experiences of LGBTIQ+ people with disabilities in the forefront to ensure a real and accurate portrayal. The podcast consists of 3 episodes, 3 queer people with different disabilities, as well as a special episode featuring professionals on what to do to improve services to make them more inclusive for LGBTIQ+ people with disabilities. Although not always possible, we try to ensure that our activities and events are held in locations which are accessible. For instance, tonight we have a community discussion and we made sure that the place is accessible for everyone. However, we still got some messages telling us that Valletta is not even fully accessible, so perhaps even in the future we can do something like this online, like we did with some previous webinars and talks, to make sure that it's accessible for everyone. This also means that we also hold different types of community activities and not just alcohol or social events which are based a lot on drinks to accommodate people with different needs.
Fantastic, Robert. I think MGRM has reached so many people in our community. It's a fantastic organization. I'd like to ask Aman the next question. Aman is representing LGBT+ Gozo. Aman, we know how minority issues tend to further be exacerbated in contexts such as the island of Gozo. I was so glad to witness the first Pride March in Gozo last Saturday. Well done for that. I'd like to ask you, what work has the NGO LGBT plus Gozo been doing to combat cultural stigma surrounding sexuality and disability, and what more can be done to overcome this stigma?
Thank you for the question and also for your kind messages, and thank you everyone for being here and for the invite. First thing first, I really enjoy being in these spaces, both personally and as an organization, as we recognize that there are individuals from the academia, politicians, government agencies, and the civil society. And I think that is beautiful also because the identity of Gozo is being represented. And for us, that's very important to ensure that the Gozotan perspective is not an afterthought. Unfortunately, Gozo tends to go into two spheres, either a pilot project to see how things work, or whether or not resources are left, we invest in Gozo, or as that is the perception that we get from time to time. And what we were very glad was that also last year CRPD invited us, and that was a very healthy discussion in Gozo in regards to disability, sexuality, and a great conversation that was a learning curve for us at the organization. And the cultural stigma also to highlight a little bit on that's why Pride last Saturday, to combat the cultural stigma, to have more representation, to have more visibility, and to ensure that Gozo is truly on the map and not just the sister island for Santa Maria or for Carnival. And one of the things that I really point that was really interesting for me is how the research that Matthew presented mentioned services, education, support, socializing, visibility, and NGOs. And those are all the points that even through the research survey that we launched last March were more or less the same. Actually, I think all of them, apart from NGOs, was mentioned. And that says something, that the LGBTI individuals who are based in Gozo are also very much in tune with the same needs. Unfortunately, we also do recognize that the research survey was not answered by persons with a disability and was not accessible. And we need to learn also how we can make this information, this research, we're talking about our LGBTI plus Gozo research to be clear, and how can we make such information accessible for individuals with disability. And this is a conversation that we've been having also internally, that we need to learn also how to do so, because we acknowledge that I'm a person without a disability, so I cannot 100% understand. And I think the one thing that was very fruitful is also the visual podcast that will be launched, that there is a podcast specifically for Gozo and for the realities of persons with disability in Gozo. And that says a lot. The fact that when you go in Gozo, as Professor Zappardo was mentioning, also in Malta, you walk and you realize that the streets are not accessible. And in fact, during the Pride March last Saturday, I was talking with the minister, literally during the walk, and we passed a comment how inaccessible the roads are. They were inaccessible for us to walk towards. I mean, with the cars, there was a bus coming onto us, so all of these, you start realizing that when you're not living the reality on a day-to-day basis, sometimes it's an afterthought. And that is our responsibility to ensure that this is no longer an afterthought. And so all of this to combat the cultural stigma stems also from one-to-one conversations, from having conversations with individuals. In fact, yesterday, and I conclude with this, we had a training with the staff at the Gozo General Hospital, and the issue of disability was mentioned. like what we need training, we need to learn, we need to talk also to acknowledge that there is not only one identity, but there are different identities at the workplace, being with the service users, being with various colleagues, etc., etc. And there needs to be more services in GOZO, but also more training. And I think we as LGBTI plus GOZO, we are extending our invitation to all services in Malta, to all NGOs, to all government agencies in Malta, to work specifically for a plan for GOZO. It doesn't necessarily have to be an LGBTI plus GOZO thing. We need to collaborate together with all of our expertise to ensure that the Gozitan perspective, the Gozitan voice, and everyone, not necessarily the LGBT community, but everyone is aware of these realities. So, to conclude, I thank you for teaching me. I thank you for inviting me into the space, because these are the conversations that we need to have in order for us to continue working. Thank you.
Thank you, Eman. I was talking to Gabby earlier, and I mentioned the leaps we've made in the last 10 years at least, and I think seeing GOZO taking this stance is an amazing step forward, and I invite you to reach out if you want to make your next study more accessible. At the faculty, we are willing and we are excited about working with NGOs, so please do reach out to us. My next question is for Martes, who is here representing the NGOs from the disability community. Martes, I felt that one limitation of the study we carried out, which was our bad, was the missing voice of parents. When we were going through the findings, that's when it hit me that we did not include parents, and their voices would have been a very rich resource for us. So that's our learning point for next time. I would like to know if your NGOs have ever encountered parents who have sought support or guidance when they had their child, adult child, younger child coming out as LGBT+. And I would also like to ask you what DPOs and NGOs can do, you think, to address the needs of persons with disability who identify as LGBT+ and their families.
Ħanitkellem bil-Malti għal dawk il-persuni b'diżabilità li jħossuhom iżjed komdi bil-lingwa Maltija ħalli jkunu qed jifhmu dak li qed ngħidu. Le fil-fatt jiena bħala l-Umbrella Organization tad-Diżabilità qatt ma tressaq ħadd li b'dokument qudiemna dwar din is-sitwazzjoni. Għattini domanda tiegħek x'jistgħu jagħmlu d-DPOs. Jiena ħanaqsam iż-żewġ komunitajiet mela għandna l-LGBTI+ li 50 snin irnexxilhom jitellgħu il-Malta fl-ogħla livell qed EU level dak li għandu x'jaqsam mad-drittijiet tagħhom ma jfissirx li ma baqax isir imma imxew ħafna l qudiem. L-Umbrella Organization tad-Diżabilità ilha waqfa 52 sena. Is-CRPD ilha waqfa minn għalija 35 sena. U laqqas wasalna fil-livell li waslet il-komunità tal-LGBTI+. X'qed nipprova ngħid? Jiġifieri jekk persuna għandha minn żewġ naħat, issa ġifieri l-persuna qassamta fit-tnejn, il-problemi li żjed iċ-challenging tagħha hija fuq diżabilità. Jekk dejjem kollha dik il-load, dik il-weight ta' problemi fid-diżabilità fejn tidħol l-LGBTI+, allura se ssiba aktar diffiċli u biex toħroġ u biex titkellem għax għandi żjed problemi oħrajn. Jiena naħseb illi il-CRPD hija l-monitoring body tal-UNCRPD. Naħseb din il-ħaġa li nibqgħu nimmonitorjaw il-UNCRPD għandha tibqa' dejjem fuq net tal-aġenda tas-CRPD u bil-partiċipazzjoni sħiħa tagħna l-NGOs u d-DPOs naħdmu biex dak li hemm imniżżel fil-UNCRPD jitwettaqgħu Malta għal benefiċċju sieħ tal-persuni b'diżabilità. Umbagħad vera meta persuna b'diżabilità ikollha tħoss li tixtieq toħroġ ma sibix daqshekk bitqila daqskemm qiegħda bħalissa. Bħalissa dina inħossha qisha għandha mażra qed titfaħħa lura, allura the second challenge, the second vulnerability għadha biss tgħaddilha minn moħħha li tibda titkellem fuqha għax għandha l-problemi l-oħrajn.
Ekku, għatanna ħafna issues li għandhom xaqsmu kif tkellem ukoll ma' aċċessibilità, ma' nuqqas ta' informazzjoni u they don't help. They don't help. Thank you, Martes. My next question is for Ramona, who is here representing Agencia Support, our National Disability Services. Ramona, you have extensive experience working with persons with disability who also identify as LGBT+. Can you tell me what you think these clients' needs are and what the agency's future plans are to address the needs of these clients?
Skużawni, l-ewwel net grazzi ta' din l-istedina. Kif qalet Claire, over the years, jisu dal-aħħar 3 years hekk qegħdin nippruvaw naħdmu iktar mal clients tagħna fejn tidħol sexuality. Ovvjament mhix faċli għax għadha daqsxejn in the dark side. Meta ħdimt ma' clients related l-iktar problemi li sibna huma fejn jiltaqgħu ma' social groups li identifikaw fl-imkien li jkollhom ħafna lack of knowledge and information about themselves u anka fuq sħabhom how they are going to accept and understand their sexuality. Their support system, speċjalment fejn jidħol religion kif qal xi ħadd previously, speċjalment minnu Catholic, Jehovah u daw reliġjonijiet qishom ma jgħinux biex dak li jkun he comes out. Emotional support, sibna ħafna nuqqas ukoll, speċjalment minn familji u anka klijenti li jgħixu magħna fir-residenzi min-naħa ta' support workers u staff. Rajt li kien hemm bżonn ħafna need for specialized psychological intervention ukoll, ħafna mill-clients tagħna jgħaddu wkoll minn trauma li unfortunately ma tiġix addressed għax naħsbu li għandhom disabilità ma jifhmux jew ma fehmux xi ġralhom f'ħajjithom. Need for self-advocacy ħafna mal-clients tagħna, ġifieri li jkollhom post fejn jgħidu x-xewqat tagħna u jesprumu iktar ruhom. U ħafna mid-drabi rajt ukoll li ħafna nies jaħsbu għandhom din l-assumption ma nafx minn fejn ġejja li persuna b'diżabilità ma tistax tidentifika ruħha bħala LGBT+. Ġifieri naħsbu li għax persuna għandha diżabilità tieqaf sem. Daqshekk, il-kumplament baħ. Aħna bħala aġenzija din naħdmu ħafna fuq dan l-aspett għax naraw li huwa bżonn use. Bħalissa l-aġenzija qed tipprova taħdem biex tidentifika tim speċjalizzat biex jaħdem fuq sex education kemm internament u kemm fil-pubbliku biex nilħu kemm jista' jkun klijenti. Għandna lan ukoll nixtiequ li naħdmu ma' entitajiet differenti biex aħna nkunu kemm jista' jkun il-main supplier f'Malta, ġifieri, jekk qegħdin nitkellmu skejjel fejn jidħlu LSCs, etc. jiġu trained min-naħa tagħna, kunsilli lokali jekk ħajamlu xi tip ta' korsijiet żgħar biex nilħqu iktar il-pubbliku, sptarijiet, you name it, we try to have it, kif jgħidu. Qed nippruvaw nittargetjaw iktar ġenituri diġà in the meantime hemm parenting courses miktar jidħol flat ta' the reproduction aspect, ġifieri fejn jidħlu tfal, jekk persuna b'diżabilità tixtieq li jkollha tfal. Aħna ħanippruvaw nittargetjaw all the areas. Intensive follow-ups u continuations, ġeneralment jiena meta nkun qed naħdem ma' client one-to-one, sempliċement how to keep up a relationship, ma jkunx hemm continuation għax għandna nuqqas ta' riżorsi. Ovvjament dan huwa support kontinwu li għandu jkun preżenti u bħalissa ma tantx nistgħu nofruh. Ġifieri parti minn dan it-tim ħajkun qed jagħmel dak ix-xogħol ukoll. Individualized programs, ovvjament kull klient huwa differenti u xewqat tiegħu sesswalment huma differenti. Access to social groups, aħna bħalissa għandna preżenti ix-sharing lives li huwa servizz li jaħdem b'mod volontarju flimkien mal-professjonisti u ħanippruvaw indaħlu sharing lives biex ilaqqa nies li identifikaw mal-LGBT+ flimkien biex anke jekk xi ħadd jixtieq imur ġo bar, clubbing, jinnaf jieħdu kafe, etc. Nippruvaw nlaqgħu likes with likes. Access to resources, sfortunatament naraw li ħafna nuqqas ta' riżorsi fejn nistgħu aħna ngħinu l-klijenti tagħna li jkunu magħrufa fuqhom u social media, ġifieri nippruvaw nittargetjaw is-social media, ovvjament breaking the stigma about this subject li huwa pjuttost daqsxejn għadu sensittiv f'Malta. Ħafna nies għadhom daqsxejn bil-mentalità l-antika. Jiġifieri naċċel dak li ħadd tipprova tagħmel l-Aġenzija Support u d-diffikultajiet għall-klijenti tagħna.
Thank you, Ramona. Seems like you have a plan.
Iva.
Thank you. Naomi, I'd like to ask you the next question. You have the lived experience of these intersecting identities. Can you tell us more about the social barriers and the challenges that are in your everyday life? And what changes would allow you to live a better quality of life?
Of course. I think the biggest challenge I face is just the lack of awareness and education in our general society. There's pervasive stereotypes and misconceptions that surround both identities of being disabled and queer. We were hidden away or had to dilute our identities for so long that stigma has really set in, to the point where we can't even talk about these identities without it being slightly awkward or just generally not being able to express ourselves, especially when these identities are together. I was only diagnosed at age 19 and I'm very recently open about being queer. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told that I don't look autistic, that I don't look like I'm non-binary, when in reality there's no defined look to being part of these identities. When these, as well as these spectrums of diversity are not as, we're not seen as complex, when really and truly they're much more beautiful and intricate than we've ever known. I always have to fight for my accommodations because I'm not seen as disabled. People would rather ignore that part of me. Same with my pronouns. How can we help this? Well, education about both identities, and we need to include both groups. One group cannot be left behind. We need to include sexuality in conversations about disability and vice versa. We need to show people that it's okay to be themselves and to use sensory aids without fear of judgment or stigma, to show that they can love who they want to love without being attacked. Suppressing your identity is extremely tiring, painful, and can even be dangerous. We need to educate and include ourselves. We need to include these voices in the conversation. We need to be represented. We need to normalize these things and build a society where these identities are not only accepted and normalized, but celebrated.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you for being so vocal. We really needed to have these experiences related to us so that we can understand better what we can do. on every level, on academic level, on political level, on NGO level. So thank you for sharing that with us. Matthew, you ready for the next question? Matthew, we could clearly see from the findings of this research how persons with disability who identify as LGBT+ experience double discrimination in the workplace. What do you think can the employment sector do to mitigate this discrimination?
Mela, ħanaqleb daqsxejn bil-Malti biex nkun nista' nispjega ruħi daqsxejn aħjar. Ħanaqsam is-sitwazzjoni f'żewġ affarijiet. Hemm il-problema min-naħa tal-employers, dawk in-nies li jħadmu n-nies, mbagħad hemm in-nies li qed jaħdmu aħna. Kien hemm sitwazzjonijiet fejn ġieli ġejt diskriminat fuq il-post tax-xogħol billi ġejt bullied, tajjir minn kemm ħaddiema bħali u anke forsi mill-employer stess. Meta jien imur ngħid is-sitwazzjoni tiegħi nipprova nuri li hemm problema, ma jsir xejn, ma jkunux jafu kif ħajdiljaw mal-problema, ma jkunux jafu fejn ħajfittxu għall-għajnuna l-employers, ma jkunux jafu se jagħmlu. So hemm dak in-nuqqas ta' informazzjoni. Hemm bżonn li n-nies li jimpjegaw n-nies biex jaħdmu ikollhom iktar riżorsi f'idhom u dawk ir-riżorsi jkunu daqsxejn iktar aċċessibbli. Jien naf bihom għax attivist u naf bl-affarijiet through connections ma mhumiex aċċessibbli daqshekk għan-nies li jħadmu nħoss. Għax jien tkun nispiċċa ngħidlhom isma' titkellem mal-MGRM, titkellem mas-CRPD, għax ma jkunux jafu fejn ħajfittxu. So dik hija challenge kbira anke għalina stess li aħna li qed niġu discriminated irridu nsolvu l-problema tagħna stess. So dikna se tkun l-ewwel ħaġa li trid issir li l-employers iridu jibdew jattendu iktar courses, jkunu iktar knowledgeable about it, iridu jibdew isolvu l-actual problemi, not to just acknowledge them u nħalluhom hemm fl-arja, ma actually jsiru l-affarijiet fuqhom. U dawn jistgħu jkunu problemi kemm fuq il-post tax-xogħol billi tajjir direttarment lejna, u jista' jkun inaccessibility, pereżempju, l-uniformijiet they're gendered. Sizes tal-uniformijiet jew kbar ħafna jew żgħar ħafna. Jien persuna non-binary u ħafna drabi l-ħwejjeġ tal-irġiel ikunu enormi għalija u l-ħwejjeġ tan-nisa jkunu fitted mhux tajbin għalija. So m'hemmx dik il-accessibility fuq il-fatt li għandi PTSD u ADHD. Ma jifhmux li għandi bżonn iktar breaks, ma jifhmux li forsi harsh lighting ħajdejjaqni, l-istorbju, x'jiġri f'każ ta' panic attack. They just let it be, m'għandhomx idea xi jridu jagħmlu. So we need to point these problems and they start targeting them. Min-naħa tal-nies li jaħdmu aħna, irrid ikun hemm iktar empowerment. Iż-żgħażagħ qed jiġu mogħrija x'jista' jsir, fejn iridu jduru f'każ ta' discrimination, fejn isibu dawn l-affarijiet. Jien nafhom ovvjament tru l-esperjenza, ma sfortunatament ħafna żgħażagħ u tfal wara l-Form 5 jibdew jaħdmu. Dawn mhumiex jiġu malma fl-iskejjel, x'jiġri f'każ li tiġi discriminated fuq il-post tax-xogħol. So, pereżempju għandna bżonn indaħluhom fis-syllabus tal-PSD. Pereżempju suġġett wieħed fejn it-tfal jitgħallmu li jisma' jekk inti qed tiġi discriminated fuq il-post tax-xogħol for any of your identities fejn tista' ssib għajnuna. Tista' ssib għajnuna għand l-MGRM, għand is-CRPD, aġenzija żgħażagħ, forsi minn xi youth workers. So, irridu nibdew nippuxxjaw iktar il-qudiem to empower l-istudenti, empower il-ħaddiem biex jitkellem f'każ ta' discrimination. So, bil-mod nibdew nimxu l-qudiem u nsolvu l-actual problemi.
Thank you, Matthew. Kif għadt Naomi, unless you share these experiences with us, we would not be able to understand better. So, thank you for sharing. You mentioned discrimination, and I'm going to turn to Rini. Here representing the NCPE. Rini, you've heard about the problems that Matthew has experienced and has brought up. Can you tell us how the NCPE intervenes in cases of persons with disability who identify as LGBT? Thank you.
First of all, the NCPE stands for National Commission for the Promotion of Equality. The remit of the NCPE includes sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, and gender expression. The NCPE has the legal authority to investigate cases of discrimination on these grounds besides others, particularly in employment. So it is let's say, interesting that you mentioned all the NGOs when there is discrimination in the place of work, but not the NCPE, who is the official government entity empowered to investigate such cases when a complaint is received. And we have investigated such cases. We issue an opinion, and usually the employer does follow what the opinion concludes. So it is very important that when you are working within the LGBTI community, you do highlight that if you need investigation of discrimination at the place of work, we are there to help, even if you just want advice according to what the law is saying. What does the law say? Where do you stand according to law? Then, if you want us to proceed and to investigate, and we do investigate in a very confidential manner. Now, I must say, I didn't mention disability because disability does not fall within the remit of the NCPE. Disability falls under the remit of CRPD. However, when we do have complaints which intersect, that fall within our grounds, which intersect with disability, we usually contact the CRPD to see how we can get better advice from that entity. With intersectionality in general, although it is not it is not included in our legislation, however, when we are investigating, we do take that perspective. We do look at the issue of intersectionality and how it is affecting the discrimination and to what extent. This is the situation according to the equality legislation, chapter 456. So it is important that you do look at how the NCP can help you, because that's what we are there for. We are there. But besides investigating cases of complaints, we also promote equality. And we are working at the moment on a new project on LGBT issues, LGBTIQ issues, and we are trying to see developments over the recent years. How are we doing this? In 2011, the NCP had carried out a project already, research on LGBT at the time in Malta. And now we have taken on, to some extent, the issues covered in that report, and we are revisiting them to see what developments have taken place, besides other issues as well. So we're looking at education, we're looking at employment, we're looking at housing, we're looking at these issues. We have had internal training ourselves. We have workshops with LGBTI community, including we tried a lot, can't Gozo, and to do it with Gozo as well. And we're having an awareness campaign on Facebook and newspaper adverts and billboards. And we are promoting, and we are now, what is important is this qualitative research study, which is being finalized at present. So we are working on these issues. However, as I said, although we look at intersectionality, disability does not fall directly within our remit. However, we do give it its due importance when it does come to our attention.
Thank you, Rini. I'm going to just ask you to put off your mic. Thank you. That was very important information that we need to be aware of. Alistair, presenting the Directorate of Disability Issues. Alistair, on a national level, how are we addressing these social challenges?
Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation to CRPD, to the faculty also, and well done on the research that was carried out. I'll actually link to something which Andrew mentioned at the very beginning. Andrew was actually talking of being at a barber shop, or let's say being in the community and seeing what people actually say and people actually think. And I think this is very telling, because we are at the end of the day seeing, okay, how are the social challenges being addressed? How is society actually warming up to things? And it's very important that at the end of the day, we do not actually neglect what the person in the street actually thinks, because this is what will make or break things. We can have very good legislation. Andrew mentioned, for example, the Equal Opportunities Act. It's groundbreaking in the year 2000. Government also worked on amending legislation, improving legislation, which was also passed unanimously through the House of Representatives last year, adopting a national disability strategy. But still, what's the use of actually having so much good legislation, anti-discrimination legislation even, having a national strategy, a roadmap, if the approach is just top-down? At the end of the day, you have to have the bottom-up element also. And this is where, very rightly so, a number of other panelists have mentioned that maybe we still have ground to cover. It isn't that we haven't actually had a change of mentality in Malta, but you actually still see a number of concerns. I mean, just speaking from personal experience, just last Friday, I was at an event. I think some of you actually were at this event also. I will not mention what it was, but it might actually help put context for those who are present. So you'd actually expect that at a certain event, people would have maybe more sensitivity towards issues of equality or issues of disability specifically. But when there's the usual bar jokes, first of all, okay, what about this person's ears? What about this person's nose? And then, oh my God, but one of them also was trans, and people asking, okay, did it show? And things like that. It's very disrespectful. But at the end of the day, you might say, okay, it's just ignorance. I mean, there was no harm meant. But the thing is this: it all starts, with banter, if you want to actually use that term. But it can very easily go south. So, at the end of the day, it's very important to actually realize that while we have come a long way, while certain mentality shifts have happened, while we have a legal and policy framework that is strong in place, we actually still need to actually see how is it best to reach out to people, and how can actually look at both components, the disability component of a person's identity, sexuality component of a person's identity, but how will we warm people up to the idea that, okay, look, if you're actually going to discriminate, there are sanctions in place. But on the other hand, that is just a stopgap solution. We actually need to make sure that people are on board, that society is on board. And this is where, I know it's mentioned time and time again, the report actually mentioned this also, but we need awareness. We need to bring the right stakeholders on board, but with people in the street, at the end of the day, you have to have the parents on board. I mentioned you have to have employers on board. You also have to see how will you actually best involve the people themselves, disabled people actually with intersecting identities. And this is the challenge. I remember, let's say, way back, for example, when it actually came to people with different sexual identities. I still remember, even within the family, titkellimx għax jaħsbuk wieħed minnhom. I mean, don't speak because they think you're one of them. And eventually, nowadays, you actually see there's a level of acceptance. When it comes to disability, the taboo is even greater. So if you actually have to deal with 2 or 3, let's say, different components of your identity. What if you're gay, you're disabled, and you're a migrant also? Or else, I mean, for example, the regional element. If you're from Gozo, there's certain, let's say, challenges which are linked with that, as we were hearing before. At the end of the day, the report spoke of boxes. Okay, which box will we fit to? How many different boxes will we fit into? At the end of the day, you actually have to look at, okay, how can I actually see people as people? And this is the big mentality shift that we actually need. How will we get there? More awareness, more, let's say, engagement with different stakeholders. There is no hard and fast. There's no magic formula for this. But we actually need to recognize one thing, that yes, there's a lot that has been done. Top down, a lot has been done, the policy is in place, major political parties are on board, but unless we have, let's say, people on board, we're never going to get anywhere. I will just link this to the National Disability Strategy, which the Directorate has developed with the participation of a number of stakeholders. Now we're at the phase of actually starting to implement this strategy. Malta has a 10-year national strategy called Freedom to Live. It's about the rights of disabled people, but there's a number of elements of intersectionality mentioned in it. So we'll just run through a few actions in the strategy and mention, okay, how ideally we would actually implement these. There's also internal exercise going on, but then again, this is nice on paper, it's there. Unless there's the will, unless there's the push, we'll never get there. So the strategy mentions, there's a chapter about sexuality, family, parenthood, for example. It mentions the importance of intersectionality in sexual education, also in the Malta sexual health policy and strategy. Like a number of you actually have also commented on this, like in the past, that there needs to be a revamp here. It's very important to actually realize the need for an intersectional element there. Also in other areas which are not specifically related to this. For example, in further and higher education, like there needs to be work done with MFHEA, for example, and other stakeholders to ensure social inclusion in education. That curricula, but also educational institutions are not only sensitive, but welcoming to people with intersecting identities. Even like, for example, Ramon was speaking about community services, which Agencia Support offers. There's also a number of different private service providers, which also need to put into the picture, especially when there's issues such as religion coming in. If there's a gap analysis that happens, that strategy mentions, okay, how are we actually making sure that everyone is included? How shall we make sure, for example, that leaders and agency support are on board? Just because they always did this way, or because they're old-fashioned, so to say, is not justification to make sure that, okay, if somebody has, let's say, a different identity that they actually sidelined, or they're forced to conform, that actually goes against their rights, against their own dignity. When it actually comes to research, there's like memorandum of understanding between the Ministry for Inclusion and the university. This is further to a provision in the strategy. There's also a provision to actually like have further memoranda with other educational establishments. So these memoranda so far cover research, cover training. So it's important also from the university's point of view, and the university is already doing this, to ensure that even, let's say, through academics are important stakeholders, research are important stakeholders. However, research has to be participatory, have to make sure that all the different stakeholders are involved there also to inform public opinion, but also so that research can be used as tools for outreach. Finally, two other things. First of all, is the importance of training. CRPD, we've heard this ad nauseam. Okay, so we actually need to increase awareness, but how will it be targeted? First of all, like CRPD has had disability quality trainings for a very long time. These are delivered by disabled people. This should continue, but then again, the element of intersectionality should be, let's say, woven in more and more in this to actually make people realize, how about having, let's say, people who are disabled and gay? How about having people who are disabled, gay, and migrants? Sometimes it might be a bit more difficult, but then again, at the end of the day, when you actually see a person in real life, it is the best way to actually break prejudices. And finally, the media. Media is very, very important. The strategy speaks about participation in cultural life, for example, and the representation of disabled people in the media. The campaign that CRPD had was very good, like that actually focused on intersectionality. We need more of that. Because at the end of the day, how did people's, even for example, within family, perceptions start shifting? That, okay, it's okay for a man to get married to a man. It's not like, oh my God, or miskin, but okay, just let it be. No. I mean, you just have to actually see that, you know, the fact that you're different in a way, or different to the norm. So the fact that I'm autistic doesn't mean that I'm different, just means that I do things in a different way. But at the end of the day, it's just different to the norm. People actually have to realize that's okay. Human beings come in all shapes and sizes, so to say, but unless it's actually put out there, like you won't sensitize people, you won't bring them on the board. So at the end of the day, coming back to the question, the social challenges and how are we addressing them? Are we addressing them, as Andrew said at the beginning? We are, to a certain extent. Maybe we're not doing it enough, but then again, let's actually do it not just by trying to tackle the problem, but by trying to engage people so that together we can be the solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Some very valid reflections there. My last question is for Gabby, who is here representing the Human Rights Directorate. Gabby, can you tell us more about the work of the HRD aimed at bridging the two communities, so the LGBT community and the disabled community, and further addressing awareness and knowledge of these intersecting identities?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I had the Sogdesk unit, whose main role is the coordinating and supporting in the implementation of the government's LGBTIQ equality strategy and action plan for 2018 to 2022. So we are in the final stages of the implementation of this strategy, which takes an intersectional and mainstreaming approach in the 50 or so measures that it includes. We're a very small unit, I have to say. We are 2 people, okay? So CRPD and support have many, many more stuff than we do. And our role, in effect, is not to be the main service provider in working with the grassroots. Our role is to build the capacity of government entities and coordinate with government entities to ensure that the measures outlined in the strategy are implemented. And we collate feedback from all stakeholders on a quarterly basis to keep track of what is being done. And on an annual basis, we also publish an annual report. So disability is mentioned and referenced in the strategy in the first thematic area, which deals with right to equality as sort of one of the groups within the LGBTIQ community which needs to be addressed in an intersectional manner, together with other groups mentioned in this sense that are sort of pointed out are also LGBTIQ elderly and LGBTIQ asylum seekers and migrants. In truth, it is very difficult to address these minorities. So although Malta is first on ILGA Europe's Rainbow Index, and we can say we have a very strong LGBTIQ legal and policy framework, the reality on the ground is that not all members of the LGBTIQ community are impacted in the same way by these measures. So access to the rights that are available to the LGBTIQ community are not necessarily equally accessible. And this is because of these intersecting identities. So in a sense, in our work, what we have been able to do is somewhat limited. So when we are, as has been mentioned, delivering training, right? If we are delivering training, then we are making reference to intersectional identities. We are pointing out what some of the additional burdens some groups face. We are pointing out who the equality bodies are that professionals and entities can resort to. We are pointing out the support that can be accessed through the civil society organizations. So this is mainly our work. We are sort of sensitizing and signposting. We also try to make sure that in our visibility campaigns that we are as diverse as possible in our representations, to include people of color, to include people with disabilities, as much as is possible. In terms of sort of direct work, we have a sort of established a partnership with Care Malta, which offers services to provides residential care services to the elderly, and we know that this is another intersection, no? So LGBTIQ people who are older and who are LGBTI, right? Because among the elderly there is a higher likelihood that one also experiences disability because of aging, right? This partnership with Care Malta, where we provide training to staff, is perhaps one of our more direct perhaps interventions in this field, and Care Malta is also responsible for the running of the Dar Bjorn facilities. So this year we have also included these facilities in our training. But our expertise is also quite limited, right? So we know a lot about LGBTIQ issues in as much as the majority of LGBTIQ people are concerned, but when it comes to intersecting identities, we know very little because there is very little evidence out there. So this study is actually one of the very few that we have that we can refer to in order to guide our policy measures moving forward. So I think it's great that the university and CRPD collaborated on this study, and I think we need many more if we want to refine our interventions. I think it's also important to see that it is a shared responsibility, what we are doing. So the disability sector needs to look inwards a little bit and see where some of their practices could be improved to be more inclusive of more diverse identities, whether it's people of color or older people with disability or minors or LGBTIQ people, right? It's hard to be an expert on everything, so you can be an expert on disability but know very little about trans people, right? And making sure that your service is inclusive of LGBTIQ people is something you have to work at. And from our end, we have to work to make sure that anything we are rolling out is as inclusive of diverse identities as possible. I've in various spaces I've mentioned the census, which for the first time included reference to sexual orientation and gender identity. So we will see how much information we gather from the census also in relation to these intersecting identities, because the census also asks questions about disability, about employment, about race and ethnicity. So it will be interesting when the follow-up reports are published to see what kind of evidence the census provides, also quantitatively, because often we are restricted to doing qualitative studies because the numbers of people we can identify with intersecting identities is often few. So we resort to qualitative studies, but I think quantitative studies are also essential if we want to make some systemic changes and understand better certain communities. And we also have another opportunity because, as I said, our current strategy is coming to an end, which means we will shortly be working on our next strategy, and I am sure that one of the areas that we will need to develop in this next strategy is these groups that have intersecting identities, the groups that are harder to reach, right? Because in terms of our legal framework, we are almost there, right? We have developed policies in key areas, education, health, etc., policing, but now the challenge is how to effectively include these hard-to-reach groups.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you for that. Yes, this is the first study on intersecting identities, in fact, and it's something I had wished for a long time, so it's a bit of a dream come true to see this happening. And the value of the collaboration of all these entities, as you mentioned, we all feed each other. The CRPD, the HRD, the NGOs, the directorate. I think we need to remain as one united front. I give over to Samantha.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you everyone for your contributions. Welcome. The next, I think this was a very fruitful discussion. the challenges identified from the different sectors in the implementation of policies. I think, Gabi, you made a very interesting point about representation. I think we need to be represented in the different spheres more than we already are. We need to, yes, the numbers are small, so we need to identify persons who can contribute to our different sectors, who can be in the different spheres and realize the different conversations happening and making sure that we can bridge these conversations. Ultimately, we're all here to have equal rights. We're all here to be treated as we would like to be treated, to be free, to live our own lives as we wish. And yes, the barriers of disability are still quite impactful, but so are the barriers and the challenges that come with identifying as part of the LGBTIQ+ community. And for me, we cannot have people who have these intersecting identities and separate these identities, because if you are trapped in your life because there is no accessibility, but you didn't come out, or I mean, even the idea of coming out it should be challenged in its sense. But if you cannot be open with your family, so if you do not have the opportunity to dialogue, to make friends, to socialize because of challenges out there related to disability, but even your family, due to overprotectiveness, due to the cultural and religious beliefs of your family, for example, would not accept you as a person who identify also as part of the LGBTI community, this is a priority, even for us, especially because the UN CRPD also speaks about violence and exploitation, and in situations where there is abuse in the household especially, and one cannot be free living their lives, this for me is a priority. So now I want to take the opportunity to finally launch this initiative that we've been working on. These are 3 podcasts that speak about this intersectionality, and that will be published in the coming days as part of the Pride celebrations. So fidejkom, Nick.
Il-komunità tal-medicina ma tantx ħasbet li persuna wheelchair user tista' tkun trans, allura kelli bżonn nispjega iżjed minn persuna li m'għandix diżabilità.
X'inhi l-esperjenza tiegħek ta' intersezzjonalità, ġifieri li inti persuna li tagħmel parti mill-komunità LGBTIQ+ u anke persuna b'diżabilità?
Qegħdin nifhmu u qed jgħallimna anke din dwar din l-esperjenza għaliex qed nitgħallmu b'din il-konverzazzjoni.
Fortunatament ma ġiex minn minorities differenti u ġiex minorities u li huma dar. Ġifieri ġeneralment jintasew. Imbagħad kollhom xi persuna bħali ngħidilhom isma' jien teżisti wkoll.
Within the LGBTI community, other minorities, when there are intersectionalities, we still find that it's a segregated community.
I think that there is a societal attitude that seems to say that disabled people are more or less asexual and don't actually need or desire relationships, which also hinders their ability to have some intimacy if they want to.
Are there any plans to collaborate, network and liaise, read the issue of intersectionality between all of you together?
My idea is to have a specific team within the agency which will focus just on sexuality, so that persons with disability will have continuous support on such subject.
Pronouns are important since I don't personally want to be addressed as he or she, so I use they, them in everyday life, which is more challenging when it comes to Maltese, but I try to stick to them as much as possible.
The barriers that exclude you from society, which barriers have you encountered in your journey?
Finding your community and finding your identity is so important to everything in your life, because identity is you, and you shouldn't be ashamed or confused as to who you are.
Thank you. Li kienet kollaborazzjoni bejn CRPD u l-MGRM, looking forward għal-iktar kollaborazzjonijiet u anka diskussjonijiet along these lines. Suġġerkom li tiffollowjaw daw id-diskussjonijiet għax hemm ħafna iktar diskussjoni milli rajna hawnhekk. Ħajkunu qegħdin jitilgħu fl-8, 9, 10 ta' din il-ġimgħa fej diskussjonijiet ħajkunu qegħdin jilħu l-pik tagħhom fil-ġurnata ta' Pride ukoll. Jiena min-naħa tiegħi nispera li da dialogu ma jkunx a one-time occasion imma naraw li nibqgħu nżommuh flimkien biex anka kifett anka fil-bidu we follow up is-sena d-dieħla x'għamilna s'issa. Jekk nżommu dialogu jkollna nirrapportaw. Ħanħalli fidejn issa il-politiċi, il-ministri u l-kallima tal-oppożizzjoni li naqdu magħna anke din l-attività, ħanħalli fidejk l-Onorevoli Grazzella għat-tard brevi.
Grazzi ħafna l-ewwel nett nixtieq nibda billi nirringrazzja lill-Kummissjoni għad-drittijiet tal-persuni b'diżabilità kif ukoll il-Fakultà tas-Social Wellbeing illi qed jaqsmu magħna dan l-istudju u li qegħdin jkunu l-vuċi ta' nies li qegħdin ibatu fis-silenzju. Jiena nixtieq l-ewwel nagħmel daqsxejn illi ngħid illi propju meta jien ruħi politika snin ilu bdejt billi mexxejt il-forum Opportunitajiet Indaqs u li dan il-forum propju fuq minnu aħna konna nibbażaw illi ma ssirx diskriminazzjoni fuq diversi setturi tas-soċjetà. U żgur li ż-żewġ setturi fis-soċjetà li konna identifikajna li u li għadna naħdmu fuq sal-lum kienu propju il-persuni b'diżabilità kif ukoll l-LGBTIQ. Għaldaqstant, din hija xi ħaġa li ġiet aċċennata kemm fl-introduzzjoni ta' dan l-istudju, meta inti taqqat daw iż-żewġ realtajiet flimkien huma żewġ realtajiet li għadhom jiġu diskriminati, allura meta taqqadhom joħorġu li d-diffikultajiet qed ikunu iktar komplessi u ser jkunu iktar diffikultużi, però dan jfisser ukoll illi l-attenzjoni tagħna allura għandha tkun ħafna iktar profonda, ħafna iktar intensa. Però fl-istess ħin ejjew noħduha wkoll mill-angolu illi dan huwa r-riżultat sabiħ illi biha qegħdin niċċelebraw id-diversità, però talli qegħdin niċċelebraw id-diversità wkoll għandna x-xogħol x'nagħmlu. U nixtieq ukoll nibda billi nieħu l-angolu li aċċenna fuq propju il-Prof Sazzopardi fil-bidu ta' dan il-konferenza tal-lum. Beta qal illi b'mod kostruttiv fil-waqt illi nieħdu pjaċir bil-passi kbar li nkunu qegħdin nagħmlu fid-diversi setturi, ejja ma ngħidux illi wasalna u b'mod kostruttiv nibqgħu naraw ix-xogħol illi qed irridu nagħmlu. Għaldaqstant jekk aħna verament nemmnu li l-persuna b'diżabilità għandha jkollha id-dritt għal kull ma tista' toffri il-ħajja, żgur li rridu nirrikonoxxu il-fatt li s'issa ma tantx ġara wisq fejn tidħol id-dritt li għandhom għal ħajja sesswali tagħhom kif ukoll għall-orjentazzjoni sesswali u l-identità tal-ġeneru. Ħafna drabi dan l-aspett kien u għadu tabu subject u konxjament jew inkella inkonxjament tħalla barra mill-mejda tad-diskussjoni. L-istudju li għadna kemm rajna illum żgur illi l-ewwel nett għandu iħeġġiġna sabiex nirrikonoxxu id-dritt tal-persuna b'diżabilità li jkollha kemm il-ħajja sesswali tagħha kif ukoll id-dritt għall-orjentazzjoni sesswali kif ukoll l-identità tal-ġeneru. Però għandu jixprunana wkoll sabiex nibdew naħdmu f'direzzjoni li twassal f'azzjoni konkreta u li tiffaċilita dan id-dritt b'mod ġust u ekwu. Ma nistgħux nibqgħu nitfgħu dan is-suġġett taħt it-tapit u nimmaġinaw li l-persuni b'diżabilità huma nieqsa mill-bżonn ġie aċċennat ukoll f'wieħed mill-podcasts illi dawn ukoll għandhom il-ġibda sesswali tagħhom u li għandhom ukoll id-dritt tal-orjentazzjoni sesswali kif ukoll l-identità tal-ġeneru. Laqtitni ħafna meta kont qed naqra l-istudju li sar. Kwotazzjoni u hawnhekk hawn Eman mill-LGBTI+ Godio fl-istudju, paġna numru 54, fejn daw qalu beggars cannot be choosers. Jiena din il-kwotazzjoni weġġatni illum il-ġurnata, ma nafx intom x'taħsbu, però hija din is-sitwazzjoni reali, żgur li l-kol kemm aħna naqblu li fil-ġurnata u fis-soċjetà tal-lum ħadd m'għandu jħossu tal-lab. Din il-kwotazzjoni tista' tqajjem diversi mistoqsijiet tal-lab għal xiex, għall-aċċessibilità, għall-aċċettazzjoni tal-orjentazzjoni sessuali, għal fatt li kull persuna għandha dritt li jkollha ħajja sessuali. Allura jiena hawnhekk nibda ngħid fejn hija l-ugwaljanza jekk hawn min qiegħed jħossu li huwa tallab għal dawn id-drittijiet fundamentali fejn tidħol l-ugwaljanza. Għal darb'oħra nixtieq illi nenfasizza li jiena naraf u napprezza li sar u għadu qed jsir ħafna xogħol utili kemm fil-qasam tal-persuni b'diżabilità kif ukoll fil-qasam tal-LGBTIQ. Però din il-kwotazzjoni iġġielek taħseb fuq kif qegħdin bħala soċjetà u kif qegħdin ninterpretaw il-konċett tal-ugwaljanza. Qabel ma nibdew naħsbu u nkomplu naħsbu fuq il-liġijiet u regolamenti, bħala soċjetà jiena qed inħeġġeġ lil kull wieħed u waħda minna sabiex nagħtu titwila u naraw x'hemm f'moħħna kif ukoll f'qalbna. Irridu naċċertaw li meta nitkellmu bħala soċjetà, il-pożizzjoni tagħna ma tkun qatt minn waħda ta' privileġġ jew inkella ta' vantaġġ. Irridu naċċettaw li bħala soċjetà m'għandna qatt nassumu illi aħna nistgħu niddettaw il-ħajja tal-persuni li għandhom diżabilità u jekk niġu fek il-ħajja ta' ħaddieħor ikun min ikun. Għaldaqstant l-ewwel pass għandu jkun li nieqfu nisimgħu b'umiltà, nifhmu x'inhi r-realtà u kif din ir-realtà ġiet imposta fuq tant persuni u li qiegħda taffettwalhom ħajjitha. Imbagħad inżid ngħid ukoll li ninvolvu lil dawn il-persuni stess biex jkunu parteċipi fis-soluzzjonijiet li noħorġu bihom. Għal darb'oħra nirringrazzja lill-Kummissjoni għad-Drittijiet tal-Persuni b'Diżabilità u lill-Fakultà tal-Social Wellbeing ta' din ir-riċerka. Aħna min-naħa tagħna nwedu li l-karba ta' dawn in-nies qiegħda tiġi mismuha, ser inkunu qegħdin hemmhekk naħdmu, nassiguraw li id-dritt għal ħajja sessuali u l-orjentazzjoni sessuali tiġi assigurata lil kull persuna b'mod dinjituż, b'mod ġust, kif ukoll b'mod ugwali. Grazzi.
Naddi issa il-majk l-Onorevoli Graziella Gallia, Shadow Minister għall-Inklużjoni u l-Volontarjat.
Grazzi ħafna, bla dubju grazzi tal-opportunità li l-kol kemm aħna kellna llum grazzi lill-Kummissjoni Nazzjonali Persuni b'Diżabilità kif ukoll anke lill-Fakultà għas-Social Wellbeing Università ta' Malta, opportunità jkolli ngħid unika fejn anke se naraw fiktar dettall anke dan l-istudju fil-fatt li sar matul il-ġimgħat illi għaddew. Forsi ta' ftit snin ilu dan l-istudju ma konniex naħsbu dwar jew inkella ma konniex naħsbu li jista' jsir, però grazzi għal dan l-istudju l il-ġurnata għandna wkoll qudiemna realtajiet li forsi għalkemm konna nafu bihom, forsi ma kinux miktuba jew kemm ma kinux nafu id-dettal bihom. Grazzi wkoll tal-opportunità li llum stajna wkoll nisimgħu diversi persuni ġej minn aspetti differenti tal-ħajja il-koll bl-istess tema sabiex aħna wkoll bħala politiċi naraw u nifhmu aħjar ir-realtà li għandna qudiemha, realtà fejn għandek persuna b'tip ta' disabilità, forsi disabilità wkoll li ma tidir smajna wkoll kif f'ċertu każijiet anke din id-disabilità ma tkunx rikonoxxuta mill-ewwel li wieħed forsi jistaqsi x'tip ta' disabilità għandek, però wkoll id-diffikultà li ċerti persuni wkoll jiltaqgħu magħhom minħabba wkoll l-orjentazzjoni sesswali tagħhom fil-fatt. Anke f'dan li stajna wkoll naraw anke l-kelma intersectionality rajna wkoll kif anke din il-terminu wkoll intużat għall-ewwel darba propju fl-1989 minn Kimberly Cronshaw dak iż-żmien anke biex jiġi spjegata wkoll aħjar l-oppressjoni li kienu għaddejjin minna n-nisa Afro-Amerikani. Bla dubju li matul is-snin li għaddew din it-terminoloġija wkoll żviluppat u anka wkoll il-ġurnata wkoll tintuża biex anka tirreferi għal mod ta' kif bosta aspetti tal-ħajja tagħna il-bnedmin aspetti differenti wkoll jitħaltu flimkien, jitħaltu kemm għal privileġġi u allura l-vantaġġi, però sfortunatament ukoll jitħaltu wkoll minħabba li f'ċertu aspetti wkoll għadna naraw ċertu diskriminazzjoni. L-importanza wkoll tal-interdipendenza u allura l-fatt illi l-kol kemm aħna bnedmin, l-ebda bniedem mhu bħal ieħor, l-ebda bniedem għandu jkun fotokopja ta' ħaddieħor u allura id-dritt illi kull persuna tkun rikonoxxuta tal-hi bid-differenzi kollha li jista' jkollha differenzi li jinkludu l-ġeneru, l-orientazzjoni sessuali, il-grupp etniku li anke tkun ġejja minnu, ir-razza, l-identità tal-ġeneru, id-diżabilità, il-klassi, kif ukoll anke l-ispiritwalità u allura diversi aspetti li jinkludu wkoll kull aspett tal-ħajja tagħna ta' kuljum aħna ġejjin minn fejn ġejjin. Permezz ta' dan l-istudju wkoll stajna wkoll nifhmu aħjar il-frażi intersectionality b'relazzjoni wkoll ma' persuni b'disabilità anke matul dawn l-istudju. Stajna naraw ukoll anke b'diskussjoni li kellna illum li għandna qudiemna żewġ realtajiet ta' persuni b'disabilità li għalkemm issa mhux biss lokalment, però anke internazzjonalment qed naħdmu wkoll f'dan l-aspett għal ammont ta' snin forsi wkoll baqalna wkoll fejn navvanzaw u min-naħa l-oħra imbagħad hemm realtà oħra il-fatt illi għandna qudiemna wkoll komunità LGBTQ+ illi wkoll tnejn żewġ sferi wkoll għandhom ukoll ikunu trattati b'dinjità li żgur anke tixirqlhom fil-fatt. Il-CRPD kif nafu għallum ilha sa waqfa l-ammont ta' snin fa' dik qed twaqfet proprju 36 sena ilu il-Kummissjoni Persuni Handikappati u minn dak iż-żmien sal-lum żgur illi rajna wkoll numru ta' żviluppi, numru ta' avvanzi mhux biss permezz ta' ġewwa pajjiżna, però wkoll mill-aspett soċjali fejn anke persuna b'diżabilità tiġi wkoll rikonoxxuta għal ħiliet illi fil-fatt il-koll kemm aħna żgur illi għandna. Il-leġislazzjoni żgur komplet ukoll tinbidel biex anke toħloq kuxjenza aħjar, konsċjenza ikbar dwar bżonnijiet partikolari tal-persuni li għandhom xi tip ta' disabilità kemm din tkun waħda fiżika u anke din forsi ma tkunx tidher daqshekk. U l-importanza wkoll illi tinħalaq iktar koxjenza dwar il-fatt li s-soċjetà tagħna bħala soċjetajiet oħra madwar id-dinja mhumiex biss magħmula minn persuni eterosessuali. Qed ngħidana li kull persuna għandha id-dinjità tagħha, ħadd m'għandu jkun esklus minn din is-soċjetà sempliċement għaliex forsi aħna jew xi persuni anke isuh jew isuha illi huma wkoll differenti minn norma li normalment tradizzjonalment aħna nafuha, però id-dmir tagħna l-politiċi, id-dmir tal-aqdiet, id-dmir tal-NGOs, id-dmir tal-aġenziji, id-dmir tal-fakultajiet, id-dmir ta' kull persuna huwa illi nassiguraw illi kull persuna ikollha d-dinjità tagħha tiġi mħarsa irrispettivament minn kull ħaġa li anke tista' tidher differenti minn dak li forsi wieħed ukoll iqis bħala il-prassi normali. Fil-bidu wkoll il-Professor Zappardi wkoll irrefera għal politika wkoll lokali fil-fatt l-Onorevoli Attard Previ wkoll irreferit għall FOIPN nemmen ukoll il-partiti politiċi għandhom ukoll rwol fil-fatt li wkoll x'jaqdu f'dan is-settur. Fil-fatt anke l-FOIPN grazzi wkoll għal l-Onorevoli Attard Previ anke fir-rwol li kellha qabel f'koll anke il-President u l-Kumitat li hemm bħalissa qegħdin kontinwament jaħdmu biex ċertu setturi wkoll ikomplu javvanzaw ġewwa pajjiżna l-ebda settur la dak diżabbli la jekk huwa settur ta' sesswalità m'għandu jħossu inqas min ħaddieħor. Indur issa wkoll għar-rwol tagħna il-politiċi rwol importanti, rwol ukoll biex naraw ukoll x'inhuma realtajiet u l-isfidi li għandu kull bniedem, il-bnedmin kollha li jiffurmaw is-soċjetà u allura r-rwol tagħna bħala membri parlamentari. U għadmir tagħna nemmen li nifhmu dak kollu li qed iseħħ madwarna żgur okkażjonijiet bħal dawn jgħinuna biex nifhmu x-xogħol li qed isir, però wkoll fejn nixtiequ wkoll li naslu nemmen ukoll l-istudji bħal dawn studji forsi mhux daqshekk komuni fanka referita lih Gebi, normalment dawn l-istudju ma tantx nisimgħu dwar jew kellha mhumiex daqshekk komuni, u allura importanti li studji bħal dawn mhux biss isiru però wkoll anke nkomplu naħdmu fuqhom sabiex anke naraw l-avvanz ġewwa pajjiżna. Kif jedna tbassa drabi wkoll, mhux biżżejjed ukoll li nbidlu liġiet anke smajna dal-għodu propju kif għal kemm il-liġi tkun inbidlet, forsi wkoll is-soċjetà ma tkunx inbidlet daqs kemm tkun inbidlet anke il-liġi allura l-bżonn illi wkoll tinbidel il-mentalità ġewwa pajjiżna wkoll ma jibqax ċertu stigma fuq ukoll ċertu persuni. U allura anke ndur issa lejn l-istudju l-ewwel l-impatt li anke tal-identità tal-ġeneru u l-orjentazzjoni sesswali tal-persuni b'diżabilità, it-tieni punt kif anke nistgħu nelbu l-impatti identifikati u t-tielet l-importanza wkoll li anke jitfasslu policies futuri sabiex anke jkun hemm bidliet prattiċi li anke żgur jgħinuna biex anke navvazzaw f'dan is-settur. Forsi wkoll anke faċli wieħed anke jgħid dan bil-kliem, naturalment mhux daqshekk faċli, però nemmen li bl-involviment ta' kull wieħed waħda minna wkoll dan il-proċess jista' jkompli u anke javvanza. Il-bażi ta' kull inizjattiva u deċiżjoni trid tkun marbuta mal-fatt li kull persuna min hi għandha li ma tfemmin għandha i wkoll x'inorientazzjoni sesswali tagħha u b'mod indipendenti jekk għandix diżabilità inkella le għandha dritt li tkun parti integrali mis-soċjetà li aħna ngħixu fiha. Kull persuna għandha dritt li tgawdi mill-iżviluppi li qegħdin iseħħu fis-soċjetà tagħna. Minn dan l-istħarriġ jirriżulta wkoll li anke jidher ċar li għandna wkoll ċertu sfidi qudiemna fil-fatt. F'wieħed mill-podcast laqtitni frażi partikolari fejn persuna tgħidilna isma' jiena neżisti wkoll, frażi li żgur tħalli impatt u allura mhux biss tirrikonoxxi x-xogħol li sar, però tfehmna wkoll illi baqa' wkoll x'isir ukoll f'dan is-settur. Nittama li anke ir-rakkomandazzjonijiet illi saru fil-fatt jiġu kkunsidrati u anke jiġu implementati fl-iqsar żmien possibbli sabiex ikun hemm integrazzjoni aħjar, integrazzjoni għal kull persuna li għandna fis-soċjetà tagħna. Nemmen ukoll li iktar ma jkun hemm għarfien ta' kapaċitajiet differenti ta' kull wieħed u waħda minnha minkejja differenzi illi l-koll kemm għandna kemm jekk differenzi fl-orjentazzjoni sesswali kemm anke differenzi fl-abilitajiet u d-diżabilitajiet tagħna nemmen li flimkien ukoll nistgħu nassiguraw soċjetà ukoll soċjetà li timxi il qudiem. Nemmen ukoll għandna l hawnhekk b'dan il-punt illi iktar ma jkun hemm persuni li jipparteċipaw f'ċertu studji, iktar ma jkun hemm l-involviment ta' qdiet, aġenziji, nies minn persuni differenti, nies minn sferi differenti, iktar ikun hemm suċċess ukoll tas-soċjetà illi aħna ngħixu fiha. Ikun biss jekk flimkien li nistgħu naslu biex inkomplu navvanzaw sabiex kull persuna ma tħossix eskluża mis-soċjetà li ngħixu fiha. Grazzi mhux biss lis-CRPD u wkoll l-Università Fakultà ta' Sulmebin, però grazzi wkoll il dawk kollha li pparteċipaw ukoll illum anke f'dan l-istudju. Grazzi mill-qalb.
Grazzi. Inħalli f'idejn issa l-Onorevoli Rebecca Buttigieg, Segretarju Parlamentari għal-Riformi u l-Ugwaljanza.
Bonġur lil kulħadd u grazzi ta' din l-inizjattiva. Jiddispjaċi ma stajniex nkunu qabel biex insegwu d-diskussjoni, kellna laqgħa tal-kabinett u provajna il-laħqu kemm jista' jkun. Però l-istudju rajtu huwa interessanti ħafna għaliex qed jagħti indikazzjoni dwar forsi settur illi ma tantx għandna għarfien dwaru f'dan is-sens. L-iktar li laqtitni hija t-tema tal-konferenza llum, Intersecting Identities. Fl-ugwaljanza iktar milli jekk naħseb f'ħajjitna kull dejjem nitrabbew illi we have to put ourselves in a box. You're labeled as such u tibqa' f'dak, però iktar ma nikbru iktar nindunaw illi kulħadd għandu identitajiet differenti li ma jeskludux li tifforma parti minn komunitajiet differenti. U huwa proprju dak li qed niddiskutu llum, ġifieri fil-komunità LGBTIQ ma jfissirx li kulħadd huwa l-istess, tinkludi komunità vasta, tinkludi persuni differenti u fl-ugwaljanza dak li qed nippruvaw nagħmlu fis-sens illi iva għamilna ħafna liġijiet illi daħalna fis-seħħ tul dawn l-aħħar 10 snin, però qatt fadal ħafna xi jsir. Fl-aħħar mill-aħħar l-ugwaljanza biex xi ħaġa li tagħmel il-leġiżlazzjoni u taqa' fem biżdi hija lotta ta' kuljum biex nassiguraw li ħadd ma jitħalla lura u kulħadd ikollu l-opportunità li jkollu opportunitajiet indaqs. U fil-fatt nilqa l-fatt li bħalissa ninsabu fi Pride Week li hija opportunità biex niċċelebraw din id-diversità u din l-inklużjoni, però hija wkoll opportunità biex inħarsu lejn dak li nistgħu nimmeljoraw, nimpruvjaw, kif nistgħu nilħqu aktar persuni u propju dan l-istudju huwa interessanti immens għaliex qed ħares lejn l-esperjenza ta' persuni b'diżabilità illi kif għedna jagħmlu wkoll parti mill-komunità LGBTIQ u għalhekk dan l-istudju għandu valur imprezzabbli għaliex qed nitkellmu dwar l-esperjenza reali ta' dawn il-persuni. Ħafna drabi forsi nitkellmu fuq numri, iżda fl-aħħar mill-aħħar dawn huma persuni u rridu nidentifikaw il-bżonnijiet tagħhom u jekk nkunu nafu x'inhuma mbagħad nkunu nistgħu nindirizzawhom bl-aktar mod effiċjenti. Jidher minn dan l-istudju bl-aktar mod ċar illi fil-qasam ta' diżabilità kif ukoll f'dak tal-ugwaljanza għal persuni LGBTIQ partikolarment hemm bżonn ħafna aktar xi jsir biex jiżdied l-għarfien fost il-professjonisti li huma impenjati fuq sma varji bħal huma l-edukazzjoni, is-servizzi soċjali, is-saħħa u l-impjieg, fost il-ġenituri u familjari wkoll biex nassiguraw li persuni b'diżabilità li huma wkoll LGBTIQ ikunu aċċettati u jirċievu l-appoġġ meħtieġa, partikolarment fil-proċess tal-coming out. Nemmen ukoll imma li s-suċċess li għamilna f'dan il-qasam sar għaliex ħdimna id fit bħala gvern magħkom l-qdiet, magħkom l-attivisti, magħkom il-persuni li intom l-aktar affettwati minn dawn il-bidliet li hemm bżonn nagħmlu u hekk se nkomplu nagħmlu. Ġifieri għalhekk inħeġġeġ aktar inizjattivi ta' dan it-tip għaliex bekk nkunu nistgħu narfu aktar fejn għandna bżonn nindirizzaw u nagħtu priorità għal dawk illi hemm bżonn nindirizzaw. Però aktar minn iktar smajtu ukoll l-ugwaljanza jekk nitkellmu dwarha nidentifikaw partijiet li għandna bżonn naħdmu fuqhom. Pereżempju semmew il-pronouns li għandna bżonn nagħtu każ anke bil-Malti. Ejja nibdew dik id-diskussjoni għaliex naħseb illi ser tagħmel differenza anke l-mod kif nesprimu ruħna. Nafu li l-lingwa hija xi ħaġa importanti ħafna, hija the ultimate form of self-expression, jiġifieri hija xi ħaġa illi naħseb illi bħala gvern u anke bħala soċjetà jeħtieġ li nibdew nindirizzaw. Jiena ma nixtieqx indum wisq għaliex naf illi intqalu ħafna affarijiet li naċċenna ħafna għalihom u li naqbel magħhom ukoll. Nixtieq ringrazzja lis-CRPD u lill-fakultà illi kkummissjonaw dan l-istudju li se jservi ta' gwida għall-ħidma tagħna fil-qasam tal-ugwaljanza. Din ir-riċerka nemmen li toffri wkoll punt ta' tluq tajjeb. Hekk kif dalwaqt ser tibda l-ħidma għat-tfassil tat-tielet strateġija u pjan ta' azzjoni għal persuni LGBTIQ u nittama li wħud mir-rakkomandazzjonijiet li joħorġu minn dan l-istudju ikunu wkoll riflessi fil-mużuri li l-Gvern ser jintrabat li jimplementa fil-5 snin li ġejjin. L-annaħħari nemmen li l-kol naqblu fuqu huwa li nagħmlu differenza fil-kwalità tal-ħajja taċ-ċittadini tagħna lkoll. U dan partikolarment fil-konfront ta' dawk li għandhom l-aktar bżonn l-intervent tagħna. Għal xi soċjetà li nixtiequ ngħixu fiha lkoll hija mibnija fuq ir-rispett tad drittijiet umani, l-ekwità u s-solidarjetà tagħna. Fl-aħħar mill-aħħar nemmen illi għandna bżonn naħdmu flimkien u nagħlaq billi ningrazzja lil dawk kollha li b'xi mod ikkontribwew għal dan l-istudju fosthom il-Kummissjoni u l-Fakultà li semmejt aktar kmieni, il-Ministru għall-Inklużjoni, il-Volontarjat u d-Drittijiet tal-Konsumatur u fuq kollox dawk li jaċċettaw li jiġu parti mill-istudju li jkunu intervistati biex jaqsmu l-esperjenzi personali u professjonali tagħhom. Grazzi tal-ħidma tagħkom u nittama li m'għandhomux ma niltaqgħu.
Grazzi lilek tal-kontribut nħalli fidejn issa għall-aħħar kelmiet lill-Onorevoli Giulia Farrugia Portelli, Ministru għall-Inklużjoni, l-Organizzazzjonijiet Volontari u l-Konsumatur.
Xtaqt naqsam ftit punti. Meta 40 sena ilu ħafna illi trabbew f'dik il-ġenerazzjoni, kienet ġenerazzjoni li kliem sempliċi bħal period għat ma nstema fil-dar tagħna. U l-istess il-kelma sess. U meta saqsi lil-cohorts tagħna ta' dik il-ġenerazzjoni, il-maġġoranza assoluta għaddew minn dik l-esperjenza. Jiena ma rridx nerġa' inġeddet il-memorji ta' dik l-epoka, imma rrid nipprova nagħmel dik il-bidla li llum flimkien ma' binti għad li għandha 9 snin tkellimna fuq il-kelma period, tkellimna fuq suġġetti oħra, inkluż id-diżabilità, u inkluż wkoll illi il-kelma familja mhix neċessarjament mara u raġel, dik l-istampa tipika li dejjem temawna tul is-snin, imma li l-kelma familja għandha forom differenti. 2, 3, 4 metodi differenti kollha għandhom element komuni l-imħabba illi kapaċi tagħti lura. U iddejjaqna ħafna illi għexna f'ġenerazzjoni illi il-kelma sess kienet tabu u t-tabu jkompli jikber jekk inżewġuha mal-kelma diżabilità. U naħseb li llum il-fatt li qegħdin nitkellmu dwar dan is-suġġett imma mhux li aħna qegħdin nitkellmu, imma li smajna il-protagonisti stess min għandu diżabilità jgħid x'jixtieq hija l-ikbar għodda li se ġġib il-bidla. U din hija l-iktar ħaġa li timlini b'sodisfazzjon li qegħdin hawnhekk niddiskutu x'inhuma l-bidliet soċjali, bidliet li hemm bżonn forsi fil-liġijiet tagħna, illi mhix nemmen jien, imma illi x-xewqa tal-bidla ġejja mill-istess persuni b'diżabilità li huma wkoll għandhom ix-xewqa tagħhom illi jgħixu f'dan il-pajjiż mingħajr biża' li toħroġ hemm barra u li xi ħadd jirredikolak. U l-mixja li għamilna f'dan il-pajjiż ma kienx mixja b'kombinazzjoni, ġifieri jiena meta inħares lura ngħid li xi ħadd x'imkien xel dik il-fjamma illi ġabet bidliet waħda wara l-oħra. U nara u nieħu gost li magħna f'din il-kamra llum hawn ikoni bħal Gabi illi bil-kappell ieħor meta kont għandni ġurnalista ma beżatx illi emnet, illi kienet perseveranti u li dik il-fjamma li bdiet ma kienitx baqgħet hemm b'mod kontinwu. Sakemm hemm dik il-passjoni li tibqa' kontinwa u li ġejja minn stakeholders differenti, nemmen illi dik il-bidla se tkun iktar maġla mill-proċess li għaddejna minnu snin qabel. X'qed isir bħalissa biex ma ntawwalx ħafna. Ir-riċerka hija tajba u hija importanti biex il-politiku il-bidliet li jagħmel ikunu msejsa fuq fatti, fuq neċessità li għandha l-istess soċjetà. U meta nsemmi l-kelma università jiena nħu gost għaliex fis-silenzju tul dawn l-aħħar xhur saru bidliet importanti. Wieħed mill-isbaħ proġetti li għaddejjin bħalissa hi kif persuni b'diżabilità qegħdin jippreparaw ruħhom biex ikunu ġenituri. U allura dik hija xi ħaġa pożittiva ħafna li aħna qed naraw li b'mod tanġibbli dak li aħna iffirmajna għalih l-istrateġija wkoll nazzjonali għal persuni b'diżabilità titkellem b'mod ċar dwar is-sesswalità. U allura rridu nibdew nittikjaw il-kaxex aħna b'ritmu maġġel. Ma rridx nara 10 snin oħra biex naraw il-bidliet li jmiss, u allura li qegħdin hawnhekk niddiskutu b'mod konkret fuq x'irridu aħna nbidlu hija xi ħaġa li trid timlina b'entużjażmu u trid to set the ball rolling fl-affarijiet l-oħra li hemm bżonn naraw bħala bidla. Jiena nixtieq nirringrazzja lil kull min ħadem biex wasalna fejn għandu x'jaqsam drittijiet u ejja nagħmlu l-milestones li jmiss mill-aktar fis possibbli. Jiena ħan ilbeż din il-badge li mhux biss hija simbolika, ma rrid nilbisha wkoll nhar is-sibt li ġej u nieħu gost li l-branding ukoll li għandna hawnhekk LGBT+ Disability Towards an Inclusive Pride.
Grazzi ħafna, grazzi tal-li attendejtu, grazzi tal-li parteċipajtu. Naħseb nirringrazzja l-iktar lil Naomi, lil Matthew, lil Alex li ipparteċipaw f'daw id-diskussjonijiet li qasmu l-esperjenzi tagħhom għaliex fl-aħħar mill-aħħar ir-realtajiet tagħkom l-iktar li huma s-suġġett ta' diskussjoni fl-aħħar mill-aħħar u jekk ma nisimgħux il-perspettiva tagħkom aħna nkunu qegħdin ngħixu flama. Jiġifieri nispera li anzi tkomplu tħeġġu aktar żgħażagħ bħalkom anke persuni forsi li huma akbar fleta li għandhom diżabilitajiet li forsi sabu diffikultajiet forsi fil-passat forsi issa biex joħorġu jgħaddu minn dan il-proċess. Il-proċess tal-coming out isu anke meta għandek diżabilità li ma tidirx. Isek dejjem qed tagħmlu. Ovvjament meta għandek dan l-intersectionality ukoll huwa aktar komplikat kif semmejt tajjeb inti Naomi. Jiena għalissa m'għandix iktar xi ngħid, però se nkun qed nerġgħu nikkuntattjakom żgur għaliex naħseb hemm ħafna iktar xogħol xi jsir. Nispera li segwu l-podcast tagħna and have a happy Pride.